Before we dive into this eerie adventure, we want to remind you that the story you are about to watch is a work of fiction. Every character, city, and location you'll encounter in this video springs from the realm of imagination. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, or to real-world locations is purely coincidental. So, grab your popcorn, dim the lights, and prepare for a journey into the supernatural. Happy watching, and remember, it's only a story.
In the heart of Washington, D.C., beneath the grandeur of its monuments and the facade of its political might, lies a city teeming with secrets, where truth is often a casualty in the game of power. I've walked these streets for years, not as a politician or a socialite, but as a reporter, a chronicler of events, both mundane and monumental. My name has graced the bylines of stories that have captured the city's highs and lows, but tonight, as I sit at my desk littered with notes and half-empty coffee cups, I find myself wrestling with a story unlike any I've ever encountered. This story begins on a night like many others in the capital, at a gala filled with the kind of people whose smiles are as calculated as the moves on a chessboard. I was there, not in search of a story, but simply fulfilling the routine task of covering the social beat. Yet, what I stumbled upon was a narrative so tangled in the webs of power and deceit that it threatened to upend everything I thought I knew about the city. It was a murder that set everything in motion, the death of a woman whose name was spoken in hushed tones among the elite, and whose influence reached into the highest echelons of power. Her demise was not just a loss of life, it was the unraveling of a carefully woven tapestry of lies and secrets that had kept the city's true face hidden from view. In my years of reporting, I've learned to question everything, to look beyond the surface. But nothing could have prepared me for the labyrinth of intrigue that this investigation would lead me into. As I delved deeper, I found myself entangled in a story that was as dangerous as it was necessary to tell. In these pages, I lay bare the journey I embarked on, a journey that took me into the darkest corners of power and corruption in 1960s Washington, D.C. It's a tale of a city and its machinations, of powerful figures whose influence extends beyond the marble halls of governance, and of a single reporter's quest to unearth the truth in a world where truth is often the first casualty. But be warned, this is not just a story about the corruption of the powerful, it's a testament to the dangerous path one walks when chasing after ghosts hidden in the shadows of power. It's a story that needs to be told, not just for the sake of the truth, but for the city that I have come to call home. As I write this, I can't help but feel a sense of foreboding. Exposing the truth comes at a price I am yet to fully understand. But if there's one thing my years in this city have taught me, it's that some stories, no matter how perilous, demand to be told. And this, dear reader, is one of those stories. Welcome to Silenced in the Capitol. The day had begun like any other in the bustling newsroom of the Washington Post. The air was thick with the scent of ink and the sound of clattering typewriters as stories were born from the relentless tapping of keys. I sat at my desk, somewhat disinterestedly sifting through a pile of potential leads and local happenings, when my editor, a gruff man named Harold, beckoned me over with a wave of his hand. "Got something a bit different for you today," he said, handing me an envelope with a wry smile. Inside, I found an invitation to one of Washington's most anticipated social events of the season, a gala hosted by none other than Eleanor Gresham, a woman whose name was synonymous with wealth, influence, and political connections. Eleanor was the kind of woman who held the city's elite in the palm of her hand. A widow of a prominent senator, she had carved a niche for herself as a philanthropist and a patron of the arts. Her soirees were known to be extravagant affairs, attended by the who's who of D.C. from senators and congressmen to foreign dignitaries and high-ranking officials. "Why am I being sent to a high society gala?" I asked, slightly puzzled. Harold's response was simple yet telling, because, my friend, in this city, the real stories aren't always found in the halls of Congress or the chambers of the Supreme Court. Sometimes, they're hidden in plain sight, among the clinking of champagne glasses and the rustle of silk gowns. As I prepared for the evening, I couldn't shake off a feeling of intrigue. Covering social events was not my usual beat, but Harold's words had struck a chord. In Washington, every gathering, no matter how frivolous it might seem, had the potential to be a nexus of power and information. Arriving at the gala that evening, I was immediately struck by the opulence that surrounded me. The Gresham Mansion was a sight to behold, with its sprawling gardens, elegant architecture, and an air of old-world charm. The guests were a mix of elegance and power, each carrying stories that were yet to be told. As I navigated through the crowd, making small talk and observing the dynamics at play, I couldn't help but feel like an outsider. This was a world far removed from the gritty reality of my daily reporting, a world where alliances were formed over canops and policy decisions were influenced with a dance. But as the night wore on, I began to see the cracks beneath the surface. Hushed conversations that ceased when approached, furtive glances exchanged between supposed strangers, subtle exchanges that hinted at something more than mere social pleasantries. It was clear that this gala was more than just a gathering of the city's elite, it was a chessboard, and the players were masters of the game. Little did I know, as I left the mansion that night, that I had just stepped into a story that would consume me entirely, a story that would reveal the true face of the city I thought I knew. The murder of Eleanor Gresham was just the beginning, and I was about to be plunged into the depths of a mystery that would challenge everything I believed in. The Gresham mansion, bathed in the soft glow of twilight, was a spectacle of high society's grandeur. As I stepped onto the sprawling estate, the sounds of a string quartet filled the air, mingling with the soft murmur of distinguished guests. The garden was a tapestry of colors, adorned with twinkling lights that gave it a fairy tale allure. I couldn't help but marvel at the scene before me, a stark contrast to the gritty streets and stark offices where I usually found my stories. I made my way through the crowd, notebook in pocket, ostensibly to capture the essence of the event for my piece. Yet, my reporter's instinct told me to look beyond the surface, to observe the interactions and nuances that might hint at deeper narratives. Eleanor Gresham, the evening's hostess, was the epitome of grace and poise. Dressed in an elegant gown that sparkled under the garden lights, she moved through the crowd with an air of confidence that only those of her stature possessed. Her charm was magnetic, drawing people to her with an almost effortless ease. Watching her, I couldn't help but be intrigued by the woman who seemed to hold the city's elite in the palm of her hand. As the evening progressed, the atmosphere of congeniality and refinement continued. Yet, beneath the veneer of elegance, I sensed undercurrents of tension. There were hushed conversations that paused as I walked by, glances that held more than just social pleasantries, and fleeting expressions that betrayed hidden agendas. I found myself drawn to a small group engaged in what seemed like a particularly intense discussion. As I approached, the conversation abruptly stopped, and I was met with polite but guarded smiles. It was clear that certain topics were not meant for outsider ears. This only piqued my curiosity further. What were these power players discussing with such secrecy? The highlight of the evening came when Eleanor took to the stage to address her guests. Her speech was a blend of charm and eloquence, touching on the importance of unity and cooperation among the city's leaders. Yet, even as she spoke of collaboration, I couldn't shake the feeling that there were unspoken tensions and alliances at play in this very garden. As the night drew to a close, I left the gala with a notebook filled with observations but no concrete story. It was a world of shadows and subtleties, where the real stories were hidden behind a facade of smiles and handshakes. But the true story, the one that would change everything, was yet to unfold. It was an event that would shock the city to its core and send me down a path of no return. The murder of Eleanor Gresham was not just the end of a life, it was the beginning of a revelation that would expose the hidden depths of Washington's elite. Little did I know, as I walked away from the Gresham mansion, that I was stepping into a web of intrigue that would test my resolve as a reporter and shake my understanding of truth and power. The morning after the gala, the city awoke to a headline that would dominate the news cycle for weeks to come. Eleanor Gresham, socialite and philanthropist, found murdered in her home. The news hit me like a bolt of lightning. Just hours before, I had seen her alive, the very picture of vitality and influence. Now, she was gone, her life cut short in a most brutal and unexpected manner. As details emerged, the story became even more baffling. Eleanor had been found in her study, a room that spoke of her taste and sophistication. The police reported no signs of forced entry, suggesting that she might have known her assailant. Rumors swirled about the motive, ranging from a botched robbery to a personal vendetta. But in a city where secrets were currency, I suspected that the truth was far more complicated. The murder of someone as prominent as Eleanor Gresham was bound to cause ripples in the high circles of Washington. She was a woman with connections that ran deep into the political landscape, a benefactor to many causes, and a friend to powerful figures. Her death was not just a personal tragedy, it was a shockwave that reverberated through the corridors of power. As a reporter, I knew this story was big. But more than that, I felt a compelling need to uncover the truth behind her death. This was no ordinary crime, it was a mystery that lay at the intersection of power, politics, and privilege. I began my investigation with a visit to the scene of the crime. The Gresham mansion, once a symbol of opulence and joy, now stood as a silent witness to a heinous act. Police officers and detectives milled about, their faces etched with concentration and concern. In speaking with the officers, I gleaned little beyond what was already public knowledge. The investigation was in its early stages, and the police were tight-lipped about the details. It was clear that they were under pressure to solve the case quickly, given the high-profile nature of the victim. My next stop was the Post's archives. I spent hours poring over articles and clippings about Eleanor, tracing her rise in Washington's social and political spheres. She had been a patron to many, a confidant to some of the city's most influential figures. Her network was vast, and her influence substantial. This made the list of potential suspects and motives extensive and complex. As the day turned to evening, I sat at my desk, surrounded by notes and clippings, a growing sense of unease settling over me. This was more than a murder investigation. It was a puzzle that delved into the heart of the city's power dynamics. Eleanor Gresham's murder had peeled back the curtain on a world of hidden alliances and silent battles for influence. And as I delved deeper into this world, I knew that what I would uncover could shake the very foundations of the city I thought I knew. The stakes were high, and the path ahead fraught with danger. But there was no turning back now. The story of Eleanor Gresham's murder was mine to tell, and I was determined to see it through, no matter where it led. The following day, with the echo of the shocking news still reverberating through the city, I began my investigation in earnest. The murder of Eleanor Gresham was not just a high-profile case, it was a labyrinth of intrigue and hidden truths waiting to be unraveled. My first step was to revisit the gala, not physically, but through the lens of my notes and memories. Who had Eleanor spoken to? Were there any exchanges that, in retrospect, seemed fraught with tension or hidden meaning? The faces and conversations of the previous night swam through my mind, a parade of potential leads and dead ends. I decided to start with the guests at the gala. These were people of influence and power, individuals who moved in the same circles as Eleanor. My list was long: politicians, business tycoons, foreign diplomats. Each of them could hold a piece of the puzzle, or perhaps be a piece themselves. My inquiries began with subtle conversations, casual meetups where I probed for reactions and information about Eleanor. The responses were varied expressions of shock, condolences, and in some cases, visible discomfort at the line of questioning. It was clear that Eleanor's death had struck a nerve, and beneath the surface, there were undercurrents of fear and suspicion. One name that surfaced repeatedly was Senator James Mitchell. He had been particularly close to Eleanor, a regular at her gatherings, and rumored to have been more than just a friend. The senator was known for his ambition and his connections, a man who had his eyes set on higher office. Seeking more concrete information, I turned to the police. My relationship with the local law enforcement was one of cautious mutual respect. As a reporter, I had covered their successes and failures with equal candor. This time, I was met with a wall of silence. The investigation was ongoing, they said, and no details could be divulged. It was a standard response, but one that hinted at the sensitivity of the case. Frustrated but undeterred, I decided to dive deeper into Eleanor's past. I visited the library, scouring through old newspapers and records, looking for any piece of history that could shed light on her life and, ultimately, her death. Eleanor's past was a tapestry of social engagements, charity events, and political gatherings. Yet, there were gaps, periods where she seemed to have stepped away from the public eye, reasons unknown. As the day turned into night, I sat in my office, surrounded by stacks of papers, each a fragment of Eleanor's life. The more I learned, the more I realized how little I actually knew. She was a woman of many facets, a public figure who had mastered the art of keeping her true self hidden. The initial investigation had opened more questions than answers. The motive for the murder remained elusive, the list of potential suspects grew, and the complexity of Eleanor's life added layers to the mystery. It was a puzzle that demanded patience and persistence. As I locked up my office that night, a sense of foreboding settled over me. Unraveling the truth behind Eleanor Gresham's murder was not going to be easy. There were forces at play, hidden in the shadows of power and privilege, and I was treading on dangerous ground. But the story had to be told, and I was determined to follow it to the end, wherever it might lead. The following days were a whirlwind of discreet meetings, clandestine phone calls, and endless digging through records and archives. My investigation into Eleanor Gresham's murder was beginning to draw attention, not all of it welcome. I started noticing unfamiliar cars parked near my apartment, and my phone calls seemed to be followed by an eerie silence, as if someone was on the other end, listening. The first direct warning came one evening as I was leaving the office. A nondescript envelope was left on my windshield. Inside, a simple, chilling message. Stop digging. The absence of a signature made it all the more menacing. It was clear that my inquiries were stirring up secrets that some wanted to keep buried. Undeterred, I intensified my efforts. My next lead took me to a small, inconspicuous bar, a place where the city's elite rarely ventured, but where information flowed as freely as the drinks. It was here that I met a contact who preferred the shadows to the spotlight, a man who claimed to have information about Eleanor's final days. He was a former staffer of a high-ranking senator, a man who had seen the inner workings of power and the lengths to which people would go to preserve it. Eleanor knew too much, he whispered over a glass of bourbon, his eyes darting around nervously. She had become a liability, a loose end that needed tying up. His words were vague, riddled with implications, but lacking concrete evidence. Yet, they painted a picture of a political landscape rife with paranoia and backdoor dealings. Eleanor, it seemed, had been a player in a game where the stakes were life and death. My next encounter was even more unsettling. A late-night meeting in an empty parking garage, reminiscent of the clandestine sources of my earlier reporting days. The source was a woman, her identity concealed by the shadows. She claimed to have been close to Eleanor, part of her inner circle. The murder wasn't just about Eleanor, she said in a hushed tone. It's bigger than you can imagine. It's about what she found out, something that could shake the city to its core. Her words were a jigsaw puzzle, missing key pieces. Yet, they hinted at a conspiracy that went beyond a simple murder. Eleanor had stumbled upon something, a piece of information so dangerous that it had cost her her life. The days that followed were a blur of activity. I followed every lead, every whisper of a rumor, every veiled hint. But with each step forward, the warnings became more overt, the shadows following me grew longer. It was clear that I was being watched, my every move monitored by unseen eyes. My phone was tapped, my mail intercepted, and my sources started to back away, fear overtaking their willingness to talk. The encounter with secrecy was a stark reminder of the dangers of delving too deep into the affairs of the powerful. But it also strengthened my resolve. Eleanor's murder was not just a crime, it was a symptom of a deeper malice that infected the corridors of power. As I sat in my dimly lit office, poring over the scraps of information I had gathered, I knew that I was on the brink of uncovering something monumental. The danger was real, but so was the need to expose the truth. Eleanor's voice had been silenced, but mine was still strong, and I was determined to use it to reveal the secrets that some in this city would kill to keep hidden. With each passing day, the investigation into Eleanor Gresham's murder grew more complex and perilous. The warnings and shadowy surveillance served only to deepen my conviction that I was on the verge of uncovering a profound and unsettling truth. It was time to delve deeper into Eleanor's past, to unearth the roots of a mystery that seemed to span the very fabric of Washington's political landscape. I began by tracing Eleanor's life story, from her early days as a debutante in DC's high society to her marriage to Senator Robert Gresham, a union that had catapulted her into the inner circle of political power. Her husband's untimely death had left her a widow, but instead of receding into the background, Eleanor had emerged as a force in her own right, a patron of the arts, and a champion of several humanitarian causes. Her transformation from a senator's wife to a power player was intriguing. I scoured through old newspaper archives, interviewed Eleanor's acquaintances, and sifted through public records. Each piece of information painted a picture of a woman who was much more than just a socialite. She was a strategist, a connector of people and ideas, a woman who wielded influence in ways that often went unnoticed by the untrained eye. As I delved further, I uncovered a period in Eleanor's life that was shrouded in mystery. It was during the early 1960s, a time marked by significant political upheaval and change. Eleanor had been conspicuously absent from the social scene during these years, her whereabouts and activities a subject of speculation among her peers. This period coincided with a series of covert operations and political maneuverings in Washington, activities that were only now coming to light through declassified documents and whispered confessions. The more I learned, the more I began to connect the dots. Eleanor had been involved in something during those years, something that had required discretion and secrecy. My breakthrough came in the form of an old photograph, discovered in the dusty archives of a forgotten library. It was a picture of Eleanor at a clandestine meeting, surrounded by figures who were now known to have been involved in covert government operations. The photo was a tangible link to a hidden chapter in her life, a chapter that might hold the key to understanding her murder. With this new evidence in hand, I started to piece together a timeline of Eleanor's activities. She had been part of a network that operated in the shadows, influencing policies and decisions in ways that were only now becoming apparent. Her role in this network was unclear, but it was evident that she had been more than just a passive participant. As the puzzle pieces began to fit together, a picture emerged of a woman who had navigated the treacherous waters of political intrigue with skill and determination. Eleanor's connections to key political figures, her involvement in covert activities, and her subsequent return to the public eye all pointed to a life that was intricately intertwined with the machinations of power. The realization that Eleanor's murder might be connected to her past activities sent a chill down my spine. I was no longer just chasing the story of a high-profile murder. I was unraveling a web of political intrigue that spanned decades and reached into the highest echelons of power. The deeper I dug, the more dangerous the investigation became. But there was no turning back now. Eleanor's story was a thread that, once pulled, threatened to unravel the very fabric of Washington's political tapestry. And I was determined to follow it to its end, no matter the cost. As the investigation into Eleanor Gresham's past deepened, a stroke of luck brought the first major breakthrough. An anonymous tip led me to a retired journalist, Martin Hayes, who had covered Washington politics during the 1960s. Now living in a modest apartment on the outskirts of the city, Hayes had been a contemporary of Eleanor and, crucially, had maintained detailed records of his reports and observations from that era. When I first met Hayes, he was initially hesitant to speak. The years had made him cautious, but the mention of Eleanor's name and the circumstances of her murder seemed to rekindle a fire in him. He rummaged through his meticulously kept archives and produced a file that contained a series of articles and notes about Eleanor. These weren't just any articles, they were pieces of a puzzle that no one had thought to put together. Hayes explained that Eleanor had been part of a discreet but influential group that had quietly shaped policy during a turbulent period in American politics. This group, comprising political insiders, business tycoons, and a few select journalists, had operated behind the scenes, away from the public eye. Eleanor, it seemed, had been their linchpin, using her social connections and personal charm to bridge gaps and facilitate discussions. Among Hayes's notes was a cryptic reference to a Project Starlight, a term that appeared in several of his reports. The details were scarce, but it was clear that this project was of significant importance and had involved high-level government officials. Eleanor's name was mentioned in connection with this project, though her exact role was not detailed. Armed with this new information, I returned to my investigation with renewed vigor. I followed the trail of Project Starlight, seeking out retired government officials and former intelligence operatives who might shed light on what the project entailed. Most were reluctant to speak, and some flatly denied any knowledge, but a few, swayed perhaps by nostalgia or guilt, offered fragments of information. Project Starlight, as it slowly emerged from the shadows of history, was a covert initiative from the Cold War era, one that involved psychological operations and propaganda campaigns. It was a project that had sought to influence not just foreign governments, but domestic public opinion as well. Eleanor's involvement suggested that she had been more than just a socialite, she had been a player in one of the Cold War's shadowy arenas. The revelation was stunning. Eleanor Gresham, the philanthropist and socialite, had been part of a secret project that had played a role in shaping the geopolitical landscape. Her murder, I began to realize, might have been tied not just to her present-day connections, but to her past actions and the secrets she carried. This breakthrough, however significant, also brought with it a sense of foreboding. I was delving into matters that had remained hidden for decades, secrets that powerful people had gone to great lengths to keep buried. The danger I faced was becoming more apparent, but so was the necessity of uncovering the truth. Eleanor's story was no longer just a chapter in Washington's history, it was a key to understanding the hidden workings of power and influence in one of the world's most powerful cities. The discovery of Eleanor Gresham's involvement in Project Starlight marked a turning point in my investigation. It was no longer a simple case of a high-profile murder, it had become a probe into decades-old secrets that had the potential to shake the foundations of the political establishment. But with this revelation came an escalation in the dangers I faced. I started receiving anonymous phone calls in the middle of the night, filled with menacing silence or veiled threats. My apartment was broken into, though nothing was stolen, leaving the unmistakable message that my privacy was compromised. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, followed wherever I went, a constant reminder that my quest for the truth had put me in the crosshairs of unseen adversaries. Despite the mounting risks, I pressed on, driven by a deep-seated need to expose the truth behind Eleanor's murder and her mysterious past. My next lead took me to a former intelligence officer, now living in seclusion, who had been peripherally involved in Project Starlight. Meeting in a nondescript diner away from the prying eyes of the city, he provided a chilling account of the project's scope and objectives. According to him, Project Starlight was more than just a psychological operation, it was a comprehensive program that included surveillance, information manipulation, and even direct intervention in political processes. Eleanor's role, he suggested, was to act as a conduit between the project's architects and the influencers in Washington's social and political circles. This information painted a stark picture of the lengths to which governments would go to maintain power and control. It also hinted at why Eleanor's past might have caught up with her, leading to her untimely death. The pieces of the puzzle were slowly falling into place, but each new revelation added layers of complexity to the narrative. The deeper I delved into the story, the more isolated I became. Colleagues at the Post began to distance themselves, wary of being associated with my increasingly controversial investigation. My editor, Harold, although supportive, warned me of the potential repercussions, both personal and professional. Amid the growing threats and isolation, a particularly disturbing incident shook my resolve. One evening, returning to my apartment, I found an envelope slipped under my door. Inside was a photograph of me, taken from a distance, with a simple message scrawled on the back. "Stop now, or else." The message was clear: I was in the crosshairs of people who would stop at nothing to keep their secrets. This moment of intimidation, however, did not deter me. Instead, it fueled my determination to uncover the full extent of the conspiracy that had led to Eleanor's murder. I realized that this was more than just a story, it was a fight against a hidden culture of manipulation and power that had operated unchecked for too long. As I prepared for the next phase of my investigation, I knew that the stakes had never been higher. I was not only seeking justice for Eleanor, but also striving to bring to light the clandestine machinations that had shaped the course of history. It was a path fraught with danger, but it was a path I was committed to follow, no matter where it led. My resolve to unravel the truth about Eleanor Gresham's murder and her connection to Project Starlight led me down a path filled with obfuscations and peril. The deeper I delved, the more evident it became that there was a concerted effort to obscure the truth. It wasn't just about covering up a murder, it was about concealing a network of power and influence that had operated in the shadows for decades. I began to draw connections between the disparate pieces of information I had gathered. The anonymous warnings, the surveillance, the reluctance of my sources to speak openly, all these pointed to a systematic attempt to stifle the truth. The realization that I was up against a well-entrenched and powerful cabal was both daunting and galvanizing. One of the most significant breakthroughs came unexpectedly. A former aide to a now-deceased senator reached out to me, claiming to have crucial information. We met in a nondescript hotel room, away from the prying eyes of the city. He handed me a stack of documents, internal memos, meeting notes, and communications related to Project Starlight. These documents were the smoking gun, concrete evidence of the project's existence and its far-reaching implications. As I pored over the documents, the scale of the cover-up became increasingly clear. Project Starlight had been more than just a Cold War era psychological operation. It had evolved into a comprehensive program that influenced domestic politics and policy decisions. Eleanor's involvement, it seemed, was integral to the project's operations, particularly in leveraging her social influence to sway political figures and decisions. This discovery was explosive, not just for its historical significance, but for the potential it had to shake the current political landscape. The tendrils of Project Starlight extended into present-day politics, suggesting that the legacy of the project was still influencing decision-making at the highest levels. Armed with this information, I knew I had to proceed with caution. The people involved in the cover-up had gone to great lengths to keep this information secret, and they would not hesitate to silence anyone who threatened to expose them. I had to find a way to bring this information to light without putting myself or my sources in danger. The decision to go public with the story was fraught with risk. I faced not just the possibility of legal action and professional backlash, but also the very real threat to my safety. Yet, the importance of the story, the need to expose the machinations of those who wielded power from the shadows, outweighed these concerns. As I prepared to publish the findings, I took every precaution to protect myself and my sources. I made copies of the documents, distributing them to trusted colleagues and contacts in the event something happened to me. I also reached out to a few key figures who I believed would be receptive to the story and could help amplify its impact. The stage was set for a revelation that would send shockwaves through Washington and beyond. The cover-up of Project Starlight, the truth behind Eleanor Gresham's murder, and the shadowy network of power and influence were about to be exposed. It was a story that had the potential to redefine the public's understanding of how power operated in the nation's capital. As I readied myself for the fallout, I knew that the journey to this point had been fraught with danger, but the truth was too important to remain hidden. The moment had come to confront the hidden forces behind Eleanor Gresham's murder and the cover-up of Project Starlight. Armed with irrefutable evidence and a resolve steeled by the dangers I had faced, I arranged a meeting with one of the key figures implicated in the documents, a current high-ranking official who had been deeply involved in the project. The meeting took place in a secluded location, far from the watchful eyes of the city. The official, a man of considerable power and influence, arrived with an air of confidence, perhaps underestimating the extent of the information I possessed. As we sat across from each other, the air was thick with tension. I laid out the evidence before him, the documents that detailed the extent of Project Starlight and its insidious influence on domestic and foreign policy. The official's initial demeanor of dismissive arrogance slowly turned to one of concern as the gravity of the evidence became apparent. I pressed him for answers, for the truth behind Eleanor's murder. After a moment of silence, a confession began to unfold. Eleanor had become a liability, he explained. Her knowledge of Project Starlight and its operations had made her a target. There were powerful people, he revealed, who feared that Eleanor's conscience might lead her to expose the project. Her murder had been a calculated decision, a move to protect the interests of those who had invested decades in the project and its outcomes. The confession was a chilling insight into the cold calculus of power. Eleanor had been eliminated not for personal reasons, but as part of a larger strategy to maintain control and secrecy. The official, now visibly shaken, realized the precariousness of his position. He agreed to provide additional information, names, and details that would help expose the full extent of the conspiracy. As I left the meeting, the weight of the confession heavy on my mind, I knew that the story had reached a critical juncture. The confession not only provided a motive for Eleanor's murder, but also implicated some of the highest-ranking officials in the government. It was a story that had the potential to shake the nation's trust in its leaders and institutions. The challenge now was to present the story in a way that would be undeniable and compelling, to expose the web of deceit and manipulation that had led to Eleanor's death and had influenced the course of history. The confrontation and confession had provided the final pieces of the puzzle, and it was time to bring the truth to light. As I prepared to publish the story, I was acutely aware of the risks involved. The revelation would not only challenge powerful individuals and institutions, but also provoke a backlash that could be both professional and personal. Yet, the need to expose the truth, to honor Eleanor's memory and the principles of journalism, outweighed any personal considerations. The story of Eleanor Gresham, Project Starlight, and the dark underbelly of power was about to be told, and its repercussions would be felt for years to come. With the explosive confession in hand, I found myself grappling with a profound moral dilemma. The revelation of Project Starlight and its implications, the truth behind Eleanor Gresham's murder, and the involvement of high-ranking officials, these were truths that could shake the very foundations of public trust in the government. I had to decide how to present this story, balancing the public's right to know against the potential fallout that could ensue. The weight of responsibility was immense. On one hand, exposing the truth was a journalist's duty, a service to democracy, and the public's right to be informed about the actions of their leaders. On the other hand, the information could trigger unpredictable consequences, both politically and socially. The potential for causing harm, both to individuals involved and to the public's perception of their government, was a serious consideration. I spent sleepless nights pondering the decision. The faces of those involved in the cover-up, the image of Eleanor Gresham, and the potential impact on the public swirled in my mind. I sought counsel from trusted colleagues and mentors, weighing their advice against my own instincts and ethical considerations. The decision was further complicated by the personal risks involved. The threats and intimidation I had faced throughout the investigation were stark reminders of the lengths to which powerful individuals would go to protect their secrets. Exposing the story could put me in direct danger, not to mention the potential legal battles that might ensue. In the end, the decision came down to the core principles of journalism: truth, integrity, and the public interest. The story of Project Starlight, Eleanor's murder, and the network of deception and power that surrounded them was too important to remain hidden. The public deserved to know how their leaders had manipulated and deceived, how a woman had lost her life in the service of truth. With a sense of resolve, I began to prepare the story for publication. I worked meticulously, corroborating every fact, ensuring the accuracy of every detail. I knew that the story would be scrutinized and challenged, so it was imperative that it be unassailable in its truth and integrity. As I readied the story for the world, I was acutely aware of the storm that was about to ensue. This was a story that would challenge the status quo, that would demand accountability from those in power. It was a story that would honor Eleanor's legacy and stand as a testament to the importance of a free and diligent press in a democratic society. The moral dilemma was resolved, but the journey was far from over. The story's publication was just the beginning of what would be a tumultuous and transformative period, both for me and for the city of Washington, D.C. The truth was about to be revealed, and its reverberations would be felt far and wide. The decision to go public with the story was made. I had meticulously prepared the explosive expose on Project Starlight, Eleanor Gresham's murder, and the web of deceit woven by powerful figures in Washington. But given the sensitivity and potential ramifications of the story, I chose to leak it strategically, ensuring its impact would be undeniable and widespread. I reached out to a select group of journalists and media outlets known for their integrity and courage in tackling sensitive stories. In clandestine meetings, I shared the documents and evidence, explaining the depth and gravity of the story. The goal was to create a simultaneous release, a coordinated effort that would prevent any single outlet from being silenced or discredited. The night before the story went public, I felt a mix of anxiety and resolve. The city of Washington, D.C. was about to wake up to a revelation that would shake its very core. I knew that the fallout would be significant. The powerful figures implicated would not take kindly to their secrets being exposed, and the public's reaction was unpredictable. The morning the story broke, the city was in an uproar. Newsstands and social media were abuzz with headlines about Project Starlight, the covert operations, and the shocking revelation of Eleanor Gresham's murder. The documents and evidence I had provided painted a damning picture, and the public's reaction was a mixture of outrage, disbelief, and a demand for accountability. The fallout was immediate and intense. Government officials and agencies scrambled to respond, some with denials, others with calls for investigations. The story dominated news cycles, with pundits and experts analyzing every aspect and implication. In the midst of this, I faced my own set of challenges. My identity as the source of the leak was not public, but it didn't take long for the implications to reach my doorstep. I received anonymous threats, and there were subtle indications that I was being monitored. My editor, Harold, called me in for a meeting, his expression grave. He expressed his support for my work, but also his concern for the safety and reputation of the paper. The legal implications were also looming. The documents I had leaked were classified, and their release had ruffled feathers at the highest levels of government. I was contacted by legal representatives, warning me of potential consequences, ranging from lawsuits to criminal charges. Despite these challenges, the sense of accomplishment was palpable. The story had started a national conversation about government secrecy, accountability, and the role of the press in uncovering the truth. It was a vindication of the journalist's duty to serve the public interest, even in the face of danger and opposition. As the city grappled with the revelations, I reflected on the journey that had led me here. The leak and the fallout were just the beginning. The real struggle for truth and accountability was still ahead, and I was prepared to face whatever came next. The story of Project Starlight and Eleanor Gresham's murder had opened a Pandora's box, and its contents would shape the narrative of power and politics in Washington for years to come. In the wake of the story's publication, the atmosphere in Washington, D.C. transformed overnight. The explosive revelations about Project Starlight and the murder of Eleanor Gresham had sent shockwaves through the corridors of power, triggering a chain reaction of events that placed me squarely in the eye of the storm. The backlash was swift and severe. I found myself a target, not just of legal threats and political backlash, but of something far more sinister. It became clear that the powerful figures implicated in the scandal were determined to silence me, by any means necessary. It started with subtle signs: unmarked cars parked near my apartment, strange glitches on my phone line, faces in the crowd that seemed to be watching me a little too closely. But soon, the intimidation tactics escalated. One evening, as I left the office, I was followed by a car that kept a menacingly close distance. I had to navigate through a series of intricate maneuvers across the city to lose them, a clear sign that this was no ordinary pursuit. The realization that I was being hunted was both terrifying and infuriating. I had become a fugitive in my own city, forced to look over my shoulder at every turn. My home no longer felt safe, and I took to staying at different locations, relying on the goodwill of friends and contacts who believed in my cause. But the true extent of the danger became apparent one fateful night. I received an anonymous tip about a crucial piece of evidence related to the case, located in a remote storage facility. Desperate for any information that could further corroborate the story, I decided to investigate. It was a trap. Upon arriving, I was ambushed by unknown assailants. It was a harrowing experience, a narrow escape that left me shaken but unharmed. The message was clear: my pursuit of the truth had made me a marked man. The chase and evasion became a routine part of my life. I employed every trick and tactic I knew to stay one step ahead of those pursuing me. I leveraged my network of contacts for information and assistance, and I became adept at moving unseen through the city I once covered as a reporter. Amidst this chaos, my resolve only strengthened. The dangers I faced were a testament to the significance of the story I had uncovered. I was not just fighting for my own safety, but for the principles of truth and justice. Eleanor Gresham's murder and the secrets of Project Starlight had to be kept in the public eye, and I was determined to ensure that the pursuit of truth would not be silenced. The chase was a stark reminder of the lengths to which those in power would go to protect their secrets. But it also highlighted the power of journalism and the necessity of holding those in power accountable. As I navigated the treacherous landscape of Washington, D.C., I knew that the story was far from over. The truth had to continue to be pursued, no matter the personal cost. The relentless chase and the constant evasion eventually led to a turning point in my investigation. The threats and dangers, while intimidating, only served to reinforce the importance of the story I had uncovered. It was a testament to the power of journalism and the necessity of shining a light on the dark corners of power and influence. In a daring move, I arranged to meet with a small group of lawmakers who were troubled by the revelations of Project Starlight and concerned about the implications for democratic governance. This meeting, held in secrecy, was a risk for all involved, but it was a chance to push for accountability and change. During the meeting, I presented all the evidence I had gathered: the documents, the confessions, and the details of the cover-up. The discussion that followed was intense and sobering. The lawmakers were visibly shaken by the extent of the conspiracy and the impact it had on national policy and public trust. This meeting marked a crucial step towards resolution. It led to the formation of a bipartisan committee to investigate Project Starlight and its aftermath. The committee pledged to conduct a thorough and transparent inquiry, ensuring that those responsible for the project's overreach and Eleanor Gresham's murder would be held accountable. Meanwhile, the public's reaction to the story continued to evolve. The initial shock and outrage gave way to a broader conversation about government transparency, the role of the media, and the need for safeguards against the abuse of power. My story had sparked a national debate, one that transcended political affiliations and touched on the core values of democracy. On a personal level, the resolution of the story brought a mix of relief and reflection. The dangers I had faced and the sacrifices I had made were significant, but the impact of the story justified them. I had played a role in uncovering a hidden chapter of history, in bringing to light the actions of those who had operated in the shadows. The resolution of the story was not the end, but rather a beginning. It set in motion a series of reforms and discussions that would shape the future of governance and media. The pursuit of truth, often fraught with challenges and risks, was a vital component of a healthy democracy. As I look back on the journey, from the first inklings of a story to its explosive revelations and the ensuing fallout, I realized that the true power of journalism lay in its ability to effect change, to challenge the status quo, and to hold those in power accountable. The story of Eleanor Gresham, Project Starlight, and the web of deceit that surrounded them was a stark reminder of this power and the responsibility that came with it. The city of Washington, D.C., and indeed the nation, had been changed by this saga. The resolution brought a sense of closure, but the lessons it imparted would resonate for years to come. The quest for truth, no matter how perilous, was essential for the preservation of justice and democracy. The tumult of the events surrounding Project Starlight and Eleanor Gresham's murder had begun to settle, and with it came a time for reflection. The story, which had consumed my life and shaken the foundations of Washington's political landscape, had reached a resolution, but its echoes continued to resonate. In the quiet aftermath, I found myself grappling with the impact of my investigation. The revelations had led to significant political upheaval, with investigations ongoing and careers hanging in the balance. The public's trust in their leaders and institutions had been deeply shaken, and the role of the media in uncovering the truth was being re-examined and celebrated. As I reflected on the journey, I realized how profoundly the experience had changed me. I had started as a reporter chasing a story, but along the way, I had become a custodian of a truth that was much larger and more significant than I had ever imagined. The weight of this responsibility was both humbling and empowering. I thought about Eleanor Gresham, whose life and death had sparked this entire saga. In uncovering the truth about her murder and the shadowy project she had been entangled in, I felt a sense of duty to her memory. She had become a symbol of the dangers of speaking truth to power, and her story a cautionary tale about the fragile nature of integrity and accountability in the halls of power. The story had also shed light on the complex relationship between the media, the government, and the public. It underscored the vital role of investigative journalism in a democratic society and the constant vigilance required to protect the truth from being obscured by those in power. My own role as a journalist had been tested and reaffirmed through this ordeal. The threats, the chase, and the evasion had been daunting, but they had also reinforced my commitment to the pursuit of truth. Journalism, I realized, was not just a profession but a calling, one that required courage, resilience, and an unwavering commitment to the principles of transparency and accountability. As Washington and the nation moved forward, grappling with the implications of the revelations, I too moved forward, carrying with me the lessons of this experience. The pursuit of truth, especially in the face of adversity, was a journey filled with challenges, but it was also a journey of profound importance and fulfillment. The story of Project Starlight and Eleanor Gresham's murder was a testament to the power of journalism and the resilience of the truth. It was a story that had changed me, changed the city, and perhaps, in its own way, changed the course of history. In the quiet moments of reflection, I found a sense of peace and purpose, a renewed conviction in the role of the press in shaping a just and informed society. Months had passed since the revelations about Project Starlight and the murder of Eleanor Gresham had rocked Washington, D.C. The city, once buzzing with the machinations of hidden power, now carried the scars of a truth uncovered and the weight of a history rewritten. The bipartisan committee's investigation had led to sweeping reforms. Policies were put in place to ensure greater transparency in government operations, and a series of public hearings had laid bare the extent of the manipulation and deceit that had characterized Project Starlight. Those directly responsible for the project's overreach and Eleanor's murder faced legal consequences, a testament to the justice system's ability to hold power accountable. The impact of the story extended beyond the political sphere. It had sparked a national conversation about the role of media in a democracy and the importance of investigative journalism. Newsrooms across the country saw a resurgence in support for in-depth reporting, and a new generation of journalists was inspired to pursue stories that mattered, regardless of the risks or challenges involved. For me, the aftermath of the story was a time of introspection and transition. The investigation had been a defining moment in my career, a crucible that tested my resolve and commitment to journalism. While it brought professional acclaim, it also came with a personal cost. The threats and dangers I had faced left a lasting impact, a reminder of the stakes involved in confronting powerful interests. As I walked through the streets of DC, now so familiar yet forever changed, I saw a city that was moving forward, albeit with a new awareness of its past. The monuments and buildings, once symbols of untouchable power, now stood as sentinels to a history that had been challenged and redefined. In the quietude of my reflections, I often thought of Eleanor Gresham. Her life and death had set in motion a series of events that had changed the course of history. She had become a symbol of the struggle for truth and integrity, a beacon for those who dared to expose the shadows of power. The story of Project Starlight and Eleanor's murder was more than just a chapter in my career, it was a pivotal moment in the narrative of American democracy. It was a story of courage, resilience, and the enduring power of truth. As I looked to the future, I carried with me the lessons learned from this experience. The world had changed, and so had I. The pursuit of truth, no matter how daunting, was essential to the health of our society. Journalism was not just a job, it was a responsibility, a duty to shine a light in the dark places and to tell the stories that needed to be told. In the end, the story of Project Starlight and Eleanor Gresham was a reminder of the power of the press and the resilience of democracy. It was a testament to the idea that, even in the face of overwhelming odds, truth could prevail and justice could be served. The world had changed, indeed, but it was a change born out of the relentless pursuit of truth, a pursuit that I was proud to have been a part of.
Thank you for listening. We hope you enjoyed the video. We highly recommend you watch the next video here. Oops. I'm waiting for you to click. Yes, you've clicked. Happy watching.